When my son told me to stay in my lane, I believed him, and I packed like the obedient woman I'd always been. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Every story has a lesson waiting to be heard. 3 days later, I was sitting in a sterile lawyer's office watching a lifelong plan my husband had quietly built unravel into something almost cinematic. If you're watching, subscribe and drop where you're watching from. This is how the woman they told to mind her business became the woman holding every single card. 2 months before all of it blew open, I was Evelyn Hart. The woman who knew exactly how Thomas liked his coffee, 2 sugars, no milk, who could map every tile in the kitchen from memory, who'd stitched up prom dresses, balanced the checkbook, and kept the house running while Thomas built his quiet empire. 38 years of marriage left 1,000 small debts. Favors called in, friendships maintained, neighborhood politics navigated. None of it seemed glamorous. It was, in my bones, necessary. Our son Daniel was a different map. He measured life in quarterly returns and private jets. At 29, he wore the kind of confidence you could mistake for competence. Sharp suits, faster answers, a Rolodex full of people who could move markets and opinions. He loved his father in the way ambitious men love mentors, with reverence and a secret hunger to surpass. When Thomas had the stroke, the house filled with those who love in loud, convenient ways. Flowers, casseroles, people who'd come for the social obligation. Daniel came in a tailored suit and a plan. "Mom," he said a week after the funeral, with the practiced softness of a man delivering bad news wrapped in good intentions, "this estate is complicated. It's better for everyone if I manage it. You should go rest or move into somewhere smaller. We can handle the heavy lifting. Stay in your lane," he said, as if lanes were spiritual advice, not the thing that had defined my adult life. The most terrible thing about that command was how ordinary it sounded. For 38 years I had been the lane, and in one sentence my work, my history, and the quiet stewardship of a marriage were dismissed. I packed a duffel and left that night. Daniel's parting gift was a check and an address to a lovely place downtown. He kissed my cheek like we were playing a scene from a script. 3 days later, sitting in Harrison Klein's office, I learned Thomas had been writing a script of his own. One with clauses and contingencies and, frankly, a deep mistrust of inherited arrogance. "Evelyn," Harrison said, sliding a document across polished mahogany, "Thomas inserted a codicil 6 months ago. He wanted protections built in, specifically if any heir tried to abruptly displace you or act with gross indignity toward you in the 90 days following his death. 17 million. That was the figure tied to a clause that would void a beneficiary's share if he or she treated me cruelly after Thomas died. Daniel's supposed instant control over 20 million suddenly had strings attached. Legal strings Thomas had stitched into place with surgical precision. I felt the world tilt and then a curious calm settle. You learn, after decades of doing the invisible work, that sometimes the only thing necessary is to be still long enough for others to trip on their own feet. Harrison organized a discreet audit. We froze transfers, verified signatures, and quietly alerted banks that any unusual movements were to be reported. Within hours, Daniel's confident little empire, his family office, hit a snag. Transfers were flagged. Utility accounts reversed. The neat picture he'd painted of a seamless takeover hummed and failed. Daniel called. At first he sounded mildly annoyed. Annoyance is the feeling entitled people make when their plan meets friction. Then the voice cracked. "Mom, there's a problem. They've frozen our accounts. This is a mistake. I need you to call Harrison and tell him to unfreeze them." "Daniel," I said, "you told me to stay out. You told me to stay in my lane. I think you meant stay out of my life, not use me later when the road gets rough." He begged. He tried to appeal to sentiment. He threatened in the way people who've always had leverage know how to, thinly veiled reminders of favors and reputations. I listened. I agreed to help only if he cooperated fully with the investigators, unloaded risky positions, and acknowledged the wrong done. He signed affidavits and gave us access to his ledgers. What we discovered was worse than arrogance. Daniel had been writing a series of leveraged bets that were built on thin air. Investors were starting to smell smoke. And he had not anticipated that other people, competitors, regulators, even insiders, might pull a single thread and collapse a whole tapestry. I watched him unravel with a practicality I had learned when I'd raised him. In the kitchen at midnight, hunched over a spreadsheet alongside Harrison and a forensic accountant named Maya, I learned to read numbers with the same tenderness I used to read bedtime books. Numbers have temperaments too. They lie, they hide, but they don't forgive. When federal investigators knocked on our door, it was both terrifying and precise. Their questions were surgical. The evidence they needed had to be irrefutable. We fed them exactly that: transaction trails, emails, phone records. Daniel's lawyers offered cooperation deals. Journalists sniffed around the courthouse steps. The headline the first week, "Young Financier's Empire Shaken," was as savage as it was inevitable. There were moments I regretted my choices. Not the decision to protect myself, but the cost it exacted from a child who'd crossed moral lines. The moment he stood in court and read his statement, his voice broke not because he feared prison but because pride had been stripped. He said the words we'd rehearsed together: apology, restitution, accountability. It was ugly and cleansing and real. But the legal drama was only part of the story. There was a cultural element, the shame and the lessons that ripple beyond court dates. Daniel's friends slunk away. Some investors reclaimed their money. Others took the hit and walked. In the wreckage, Daniel faced civil penalties, community service, and a restructuring of his professional life. He lost his seat at a table he'd assumed belonged to him. Meanwhile, I leaned into the life I had put off for decades. I renovated the sunroom in colors I liked. I took a pottery class and broke more clay than I ever expected. I used a portion of the estate to fund a small nonprofit, the Hart Family Recovery Fund, legal and financial counseling for families facing internal exploitation. We helped 36 households in the first year and found ways to teach older adults how to spot signs of financial coercion. People ask, did I forgive him? Forgiveness is not a single act. It's a slow rebuilding, a series of decisions about trust and proximity. I forgave some things slowly and I set hard limits on others. Daniel and I rebuilt a relationship, but it is quieter now. Less deference, more mutual work. When he helps mow my lawn, it is not to curry favor but to show up. When he takes his place at work again, it will be smaller, humbler. The media wanted a tidy ending, a redemption arc with a hero mother and a reformed son. Life rarely offers that packaging. Instead, what came were messy reconciliations, board meetings, legal filings, and long conversations across kitchen tables. I learned to speak their language. Regulatory, legal, financial, but I also taught them mine: dignity, care, and the dignity of the ordinary. A year later, Daniel called me one evening. His voice had changed. "Mom," he said, "I get it now. I pushed you out of what you'd earned. I thought doing it fast would spare me the work of caring. I was wrong. I didn't say, 'I forgive you,' because I don't owe forgiveness like a prize. I said, 'I saw you fall and I helped you stand on conditions.' That's what parents do sometimes. But you have to keep standing for yourself." He did. Fully. He partnered with compliance officers, took smaller roles where transparency mattered, and more importantly, he learned to listen. If this hit hard, tap and share this with a friend who needs to hear it.